Public opinion on abortion is collapsing, and not in a good way favorable to pro-lifers. We're going to talk about that and what we can do to reach the next generation of pro-life students with my special guest, Leslie Segraves. We'll bring her on in a moment. Before we do, I want to remind everybody, if you have not looked into our course, Pro-Life 101, it is a course designed to equip you to defend the pro-life view with only a week's investment on your part. So 7 sessions, easy to follow, easy to equip yourself to make a difference in today's hostile culture. All right, Leslie, great to have you with us today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be with you.
I don't know how many of our folks remember you, but you're one of our speakers at LTI, and you do just a phenomenal job reaching students, reaching cross-cultural audiences on pro-life issues. Just by way of introduction, in case people have forgotten you, tell us a little more about the work you've done in pro-life and in mission circles.
Sure. So my husband and I, we co-founded an organization in the year 2000, and we tried to catalyze disciple-making movements in the least reached areas of the world, which would be in the 1040 window, stretches across North Africa, Middle East, India, China, do a lot of our work in South Asia, East Asia, Southeast Asia. And then I'm also a pro-life apologist, thanks to Scott, who mentored me in this topic. And the reason I wanted to be mentored in the topic is because we have found that the issue of abortion is not just an American issue, but it's a global issue. 97% of all abortions happen outside the United States. And I believe the numbers are the stats are over 50% happen in Asia. So I wrote a curriculum years ago called Voice for the Voiceless, and it goes through women's reproduction, baby development, and abortion. And then I weave the gospel through. And so we use this as a platform to move the gospel into some of the most unreached areas of the world where you couldn't get in with just preaching the gospel, but we can get in with science. And so we go in with a health seminar, and then it opens up the door for people to hear the name of Jesus, that he's the one that gives value to both women and to the unborn. And so after doing that for years, I realized I needed more of an apologetic to be able to equip our life advocates internationally to know how to answer the hard questions. And then that moved me into learning about Scott and being mentored by him. And now I try to use that also in the United States in schools and churches and youth groups.
Why do you think the abortion rates are so high in Asian cultures?
That's a great question. I think in one reason it's because of the honor shame culture, just because if a woman gets pregnant out of wedlock or because of rape or because of an affair or whatever it might be, the honor shame happens in the sense that it's the result of trying to protect her life in some way, but it's also because of the poverty. And so the cultures, the governments have taught in so many of these places that a life does not begin until the baby breathes oxygen. And so many of the women are really needing education. And that's what Voice for the Voiceless does. And then I think it's also just an abortion culture worldwide. I think communism has had a huge effect on that, creating abortion culture where it's what you do when it's an unplanned pregnancy. And so it's a huge issue. I know that in Bangladesh, we just built a maternity home there, and we were shocked to find out abortion is so high. If you do the studies and look at the statistics, the government would say it's about 0% abortions. But what they actually do is they change the name, and it's called an MR, monthly regulation. And so they do an abortion, but it's to make the woman regular again. And as I've done research in the United States, this is exactly what Margaret Sanger did and other people did before abortion was legalized in our country, is that they would call it about how to help the woman become regular again. So it's a strategy the United States has used in the past, and it's one that's huge in Asia currently.
Does the general public in these Asian cultures respond to a pro-life apologetic?
Yes. Well, I think it's two sides. So it depends on who they are. So if they're getting money from the West, then they're going to be pushing so many of the same slogans and so much of the same so many of the same arguments. But if it's people that are just grassroots people, so many of the women in these cultures have absolutely little value. And so the way we teach the pro-life is about the amazing value that is given to females. And when they hear that, they are so inclined to lean forward and to understand and to listen. And we just had some trainings that went on in Nepal the past couple of weeks, and the reports that came in were just just like, I never knew I had any value from the very moment that this was taught. But I began to lean in and to go, wow, I have value. And so do the little babies. And I will never do an abortion again. I'm going to share this information. A radio group came in to look at what was happening. And that reporter came in and said, from the moment the first words were spoken, I knew that this was different because this was about loving both mom and baby. So there's definitely people that lean into this, and there's a response that I find every time that the seminar is given.
Well, this may seem like an obvious question or maybe oh duh, but I'm going to ask it anyway. When you say that women and humans have value, what do you mean by that?
So I would say that just the two worldviews that are in contention with one another is that a value comes either in what you do, or value is based on what you are. And so when we go around and teach this, we're all like, I can say it in the philosophical words, like intrinsic value versus performance view, but I like to just say it in the simplest. It's based on whether you are based on what you are a human being or based on what you can do. And when it's based on what we can do, then that does lead to inequality, because it's someone with more power will declare what someone else has to be able to do in order to show that they have value. But if we have value based on what we simply are a human being, then that actually is the playing field that where we can actually have human equality in every culture of the world.
Now, here in the U.S., the concept of equality makes automatic sense to people. They've been raised with it. Not that they can define it, but they've at least got an understanding that we ought to aim at equality. Is that same understanding in Asian cultures, or do they accept more readily a more structured society where there are levels and you find your place and stay there?
That's a great question. And that is something that, whether it's Islam or Hinduism or communism, whatever it might be, there are structures that are built into cultures. But I think deep down in the human heart is this desire, especially among women who don't have the equality, this desire to truly be a human being, to be treated with the respect. And I've had a woman, I've had hundreds of these stories, but one woman, when I was asking the question, in your culture, who has more value, male or female, all the women just shout out, men do. And then this woman actually said this story. She interrupted everything. And she said, when I was born, I was the first daughter to be born. And I was just like, oh, that's sad. No sweets were given, no celebration. She said, but when my sister was born, I was 3 years old. And I watched as they placed poison on my sister's lips because they did not want another girl in the family.
Man.
And so, yeah, this is the reality of an Asian culture. But I think deep down, there are people that are longing for the story that Jesus gives. And so by bringing science and bringing logic and philosophy and all of these things, I was just telling students last week that you can be for life just simply because you're a human being. It doesn't mean you have to be a Christian to be pro-life, but I place all of my science, philosophy, logic, everything sits on a biblical worldview. So literally everything, there's no gymnastics I'm having to play. It all builds upon one another. And so that's what I think is so beautiful. It's a tight argument, and it's a hermeneutic, it's a life, it's a worldview that actually can answer any hard question, and it can bring hope and value to people when they hear the message.
I think you're spot on when you ground the pro-life worldview in the larger biblical context, because I don't know how you get intrinsic human value in an atheistic universe that was caused by nothing and came from nothing. Absolutely. Where do we find human value in that kind of worldview? Absolutely. It just doesn't align. And so I think you're right. You have to do that. And I think this is one of the mistakes pro-lifers have made here in the U.S. We have talked about our position, but we've not made an attempt to understand the worldviews idling behind our opponent's arguments, and we have not presented a grounding for the pro-life view that is substantial enough to say we can make sense of human value. So I've gone to pro-life conferences where there's tables there by atheists for life, secular pro-life. I even one time had gays for pro-life. But here's the thing. I get it, and I'm glad they're opposing abortion. I'm not going to try to drive them away, but they have no ultimate grounding for their argument. How do you get human value in a purposeless universe? I just don't know how you get it.
Absolutely. I think that's what I want people to understand, is that truly, if you have this the worldview of Jesus is so solid and it's so big that all truth can come from that. And it's not that you have the biblical worldview and then you have over here and that there's contradiction. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And so literally it all sits there. And so that's really why we do this issue with our organization, because we want to see the gospel go to the least reached, to the 3 billion that have limited access, the 2 billion that have never heard his name. And we've discovered that abortion is actually one of the greatest platforms that we can use, because it automatically leads us into having the conversations about where value comes from and who actually gives that value to humanity. And that's what people are literally wanting to hear. Now, that doesn't mean they're all going to become believers, but what we have found is it's causing people to say, like, we had one Muslim that was in one of our trainings, and the first thing that she heard was that at the beginning, there's this great story, this meta narrative, and that when God created the world, he created male and female as Ezer Kenegadu, equal strengths. That's what it means when you look at the words in the Hebrew. And we immediately began to talk about value. She jumps up, she bursts into tears, and she runs out of the room. And so our life advocate, the person who was teaching, he stopped the entire seminar and went after the one. And he went out to her and he said, "Ma'am, why are you weeping? What is wrong?" And she said, "I have never in my life been told that I have any value at all. And you just told me that I have equal strength, equal value to men. And deep down, I've always believed that it should be true, but I've never been told that before. And I'm just overwhelmed. And I don't even know if I can sit inside the session." And he said, "Oh, sister, please come back in. We are just getting started. You're going to be so overwhelmed and amazed by what you hear, but I know you do not want to miss this." And so and really the intrinsic view of humanity, it starts in Genesis 1:27. Well, first we see Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God. So God is the one who authors and tells us who we are as humanity. And then in 1:27, he creates both male and female in his image. And that's where our value, our intrinsic value comes from. Philosophically, we can see it at the very first chapter of the Bible.
One of the things and I'm curious if you see this the same way, I see the whole push for abortion as undermining women's value in this sense. It is basically telling women that they require special surgery to be equal to men, instead of saying they're equal intrinsically. They have to now go get special surgery to get this equality. And I think you're right. The biblical worldview has a better answer.
Absolutely. We equip leaders all over the world, female leaders all over the world. And we've never once told them to be a leader, you have to have the right to kill an unborn child. We have never told them that. Yeah. So that totally demeans women. It's like you cannot be, you cannot use all your giftings unless you have the right to kill someone else. I can't believe that people can't grasp that.
Yeah, it is crazy. Now, of course, here in the West, we have a slightly more difficult job, I would say. It seems to me that the worldview structures that make abortion plausible to millions of people are more deeply entrenched in the West than they are in third world countries or other nations. Is that your take as well?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's because the independence of the West is wonderful, but when it becomes, I can do anything I want to do, regardless of what it costs you, then that's where independence has become marred and has become distorted. And so I think in the East, there's more of a community atmosphere. So I think abortion is more in the sense of, I think there's obviously in the urban settings more of a selfishness, but in some of the poorer situations, it's like, I can't feed that next child. And so I think in the West, it's more of a you do you, that type of thing. And what I actually believe is it's based on cultural Marxism. And I think that's the worldview that's moving so strongly in the United States right now. And it literally it's that I am my own God and my own authority. And so that's why I'm going to do what I want to do and when I want to do it.
Well, I think you're correct about that. Carl Trueman has a new book out called The Desecration of Man. And here's his thesis, that what we see going on in issues like abortion, transgenderism, the undermining of traditional marriage, are not merely symptoms of Western culture decline. Rather, what we're witnessing is a cultural move to intentionally desecrate those institutions because we've bought the worldview, basically, of Nietzsche, the philosopher, from the 19th century that said humans, to be truly authentic, must have an unfettered will to power. And in
Yeah.
exercising that will to power, we become godlike. Well, if you look at a concept like the Imago Dei, that is deeply offensive to our left-leaning Marxist culture today, and they are not out to merely refute that with argument. They want to desecrate that idea so it never comes back. And the reason is, if human beings have intrinsic purposes, Leslie, that means we have obligations. And if we're made in the image of God, that means we do have intrinsic purposes. Sex is not merely what I say it is, it's what its intrinsic purposes say it is. My value is not on something I construct socially or academically or any other way. It's based on who God says I am. And we're seeing in the West today an attempt to desecrate the value of man, not just make room for abortion. It's a really unbelievable place we find ourselves in, which leads me to what I want to ask you about next. You not only do presentations overseas, you do great work here in the US as well, speaking in schools, speaking to students on abortion. You recently spoke at a large Christian high school in Clearwater, Florida. Tell us a little bit about how that came about and what you said to those students.
Sure. So this is the school that my kids actually go to. And so for years, I've just been building relationships. I've taught a pro-life apologetics in the class for a semester. And I've just tried to continue to bring this idea of the worldview of life, that it cannot be just in one presentation. It has to be pushed in the school at a larger pace, at a larger rate than that. So we have a Warriors for Life club on campus that my daughter started, and I'm the adult supervisor for that. So they actually held a chapel service in the fall. They were asked by the head of school to do an entire peer-led student assembly about abortion. And so I equipped those students to do the foundation of, the logic, the science, the philosophy, those types of things. And then and before we did that, we did a survey of the school to see where was the student body, what did they think about life? When was abortion okay? Under what circumstances? And I think that the school was a bit shocked by the results. I wasn't shocked because it followed what I had seen across the United States. And one of the reasons I wasn't shocked is because the abortion industry is so loud and it's pushing in on the church. And the church is so quiet and is not rising up and standing up very well at all and equipping the members of the church and youth groups and things like that. So what I did with the students a week ago is they're doing some construction of their assembly, of their worship center. So instead, I went into a smaller chapel, and in first period, all Bible classes came in that had Bible in first period and the second period. So I did the same talk 8 times in a row. And what I did first is I wanted to remind them of the foundation that the Warriors for Life has been trying to lay as students over the course of the year. And then I wanted to answer 3 of the questions that seemed to cause the students to stumble the most on the survey. And the 3 questions that I found that they stumbled on the most is, you can't push your morality on me, women's health questions, and then abortion should be okay in the situations of rape or incest. So before I went into those 3 questions, I wanted to make sure the foundation was there. But I knew I didn't have much time because I was on the bell schedule that, when classes came in, they would take the roll, and then I had to do my presentation and move on so they could get out. So I knew that my foundation, I didn't want to avoid it because in case they weren't listening during chapel, but again, you just need that repetition. So I decided, I was just praying, going, how do I get this something that is about philosophy and logic and syllogisms and all of this stuff? How do I get it to where I can do it in like 5 minutes? And so I just, by God's grace, I came up with an image in my mind. And if you want me to share that, I can.
Yes, please do.
Okay. So the image that I came up with is that the culture is so noisy, and it's like we're all in this boat. We're all in these boats. And because of the noise of culture, our boat is just, the winds of the sounds of culture just causes us to just go all over the sea. And when people ask us questions about abortion, or we find ourselves hearing conversations, so many people, I think, are quiet. And I think in some ways it's because of apathy, but I think in other ways it's because they just don't know how to answer the questions. So what I was telling the students is that I felt that they needed to have an anchor, and the anchor, though you and I, Scott, would call it a syllogism, I didn't want that word to cause them to go, oh, this is just an academic organization. So I said, this is the anchor. And I said, it's based on logic. And I said, now you can call it in academic circles a syllogism. And I explained what one was. And then I basically said, it is wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being. Therefore, abortion is wrong. And so I explained a little bit about that logic. And then I said, but that anchor is tied to the boat with science and philosophy. And so the science argument that I gave them was just basically the science of embryology states that from the earliest stages of development, you were already a distinct, living, and whole human being. I knew that our Warriors for Life had already explained what the words distinct and living and whole meant, but I reminded them that you don't become a human being. Scientifically, you are a human being from the very moment sperm meets egg. And so I was helping them to understand so I kept saying, my logic is this. Now my science is that I'm standing on the side of science because I'm stating what embryology textbooks state around the world. And then I said, but then you have the philosophy part of the rope as well. And the philosophy is that your value comes based on what you are or what you do. So I established all of this. And then I said, now there's 3 competing worldviews in the United States right now. There's more than that. But I said, these are 3 of the largest: Islam, cultural Marxism, and the biblical worldview. And so then I didn't explain Islam with their understanding of life because I didn't feel like that was really needed because Muslims they want to populate the earth with more and more Muslims. So they're not going to do abortions unless it's a shame honor thing. And then, but I said, cultural Marxism has very much affected you because your survey shows it has. And then I explained the biblical worldview. And I did all of that within like 5 or 6 minutes. And then when I went into the 3 questions that seemed to stump the majority, a lot of them on the campus, I would go back and refer back to my anchor and my rope of either science or philosophy for every one of the 3 questions that we did. And the students were grasping it. I had teachers that came up and said, I've never heard that more clearly put. And I can work with this with my students because this just gives me a logical flow to know that I can hold on to as well. So I was pretty excited to see that it worked. I was taking a risk. I had never used a boat and anchor and ropes to talk about this, but I thought I'm going to try it. And it worked for all 8 periods.
It's masterful. It really is. Phenomenal job. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, here's what I want to ask you about. How did you equip those students to deal with the objection that, well, you're just forcing your morality, you're judging people, the whole relativistic problem we run into? We'll take that up after the break. We'll see you in just a minute, folks. Hello, friends. You may not have time to read a full-length treatment of abortion like I've done in this book, The Case for Life, the 2nd edition, but you may have time to take what amounts to 7 sessions, a week's worth of study if you want to do it day by day, to learn how to defend your pro-life views persuasively. We have a basic course that will help you do just that. You will learn how to make a formal case for the pro-life position. You will learn how to defend it with science and philosophy. Even with non-Christians, you can make a case for the pro-life view. Then we'll teach you how to handle objections, how to recognize the 5 bad ways people argue about abortion, and how they often bring up things that are beside the point. You'll learn to keep the main thing, so that you're in charge instead of feeling like you're in the hot seat whenever the issue of abortion comes up. Visit the website for details. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Again, I'm here with Leslie Segraves, a LTI speaker extraordinaire who speaks not only around the world on abortion, but here in the U.S. as well. Before the break, we brought up the topic of tolerance. Our culture hates it when we make judgments, and they love to say things like, who are you to judge, and who are you to force your morals on others? And a lot of Christian students have absorbed that worldview when it comes to ethics. And you mentioned that you went over this with the students you talked to. How did you equip them to respond to this idea that you're just forcing your morals on us?
Yeah. So this is what we found in the survey is that there were a lot of students that just thought, this whole culture of you can't judge people and all of these things. So I first tried to help them to see that this is actually a self-refuting claim, that it's breaking its own rules, that actually they are forcing their morality on you by saying that you can't force your morality on them. So I kind of just laid that out because I want them to become better critical thinkers.
Yeah, it is so interesting. They say there are no moral rules. Oh, but here's one. Don't you dare judge. Don't you dare be intolerant. Don't you dare claim to be right. Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I think we've not taught youth very well. I think we've given them a lot of rational thought, but I don't think we've taught them very well how to think critically so that when
Yeah.
they hear things, they know. So I first did that. And then the second thing I talked about is that all of the laws that we have are based off of morality about speeding or drinking and driving or stealing or murder. All things are based off of morality. So I tried to help them to see that it's every law that we can't take out all laws because they have morality behind them. So I just
Right.
basically did that. And then I moved into helping them to see, so on this issue of don't push your morality on me, we have to go back to our anchor and we have to go back to our rope of science. And so I said, we have to ask the question first, what is the unborn? And I said, I said to do that, we go back to the rope of science. And I explained what science was again about it's a whole human, distinct living human being. And I said, and then we go to our logic, well, it's wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. And that's what abortion does. And so then I said, so if this is a human being inside, science is saying it is, then we have a duty and an obligation to speak up on behalf of protection of that human being, since it's wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. And so that's basically, and then I told them, I said, it's going to take great courage to do that. And so, but that's basically what I did is I said, the first question is, what is the unborn? Well, then we know the logic is that we can't, if the unborn is human, we can't kill the unborn. And they were all, I think they were understanding it, but that's how I did it. I just went back to the rope and back to the anchor.
Well, that's an important point. We really have to go back to the question, what is the unborn? Nobody, thankfully, yet in today's culture is saying that if we pass a law against killing 5-year-olds, we're unjustly forcing our morals on people. They
Right.
only say that about the unborn because they come in with the assumption they're not human. But that's question begging, because that's exactly what the whole debate is about. Are the unborn members of the human family? And that's the question we got to come back to. We've got about 30 seconds. They also were concerned about abortion being needed for health care. Can you briefly address that?
Yeah, so this one was something that I think was the most startling to them. And I talked about that there is no reason ever for abortion in the latter part of pregnancy. I explained ectopic pregnancy and why that's not an abortion. And I made them go back to the anchor to say, what word in this anchor tells us that this is not an abortion? And they were able to look and go, intentional. So I did that. I also talked to them about that medical health care is supposed to be for the helping all of the patients, and that I talked about that breast cancer increases by 30% in women who've had just one abortion. And so I wanted to put some seeds inside of them so that they would have a little bit more fear and to realize that if healthcare is what we are after, then we have to give women the full story of what could happen to her health if she has the abortion. And then again, I tied all of that back to the anchor and to the rope. But I helped them to see that there's times in later parts of pregnancy that you separate mom and baby, but then you have medical teams that are helping both, but you don't,
Right.
that it's more dangerous to do the abortion than to do the childbirth.
Fantastic job. I can't thank you enough. Thank you, Leslie, for being with us. Great stuff. And thank you, everybody, for watching. We'll look forward to seeing you in our next episode.